All right, we are live. Welcome back, everyone. Episode 5?
5, yeah.
I think. This is episode 5.
Yeah. We just can't even keep up.
Yeah, exactly. It's the 5th episode anniversary. Definitely got a lot of feedback based on last episode.
A lot.
Speaking a little bit
so
more
much
about
more than
ourselves.
I was expecting.
Right. A lot of people reached out to me. I think it was just because we spoke about obviously pretty touching things, and it struck a nerve with a lot of people going through their own issues. But there's a lot to discuss today. One that Sheldon and I have been talking about and discussing over the last week or so. I have been a little bit sick, so I apologize if I cough or I sound a little bit raspy, as it were.
Or you could have that sexy voice like Phoebe did in Friends. I don't know, you might be too young.
I don't know what that is. I never watched Friends. I was like, that was just one of the shows I just didn't watch. I know you were like, I feel like you were just like, I feel like because it was already like it was around for a long time. That when I was already like 8 or 9, it was starting to get towards the end. But I used to just watch it with like Shoshi or Mom. But I feel like it was already like a little bit just like above me, so I feel like you're 4 years younger than me, 3.5. Right. So my friends who have like older siblings who they kind of grew up and were in the house with, because our 2 sisters were out when they were 18. So like who had older siblings who were sibling in the house, they were introduced to that kind of stuff. But I never watched Star Wars. All my friends have watched. How have you ever watched Star Wars? No one in our family was interested in Star Wars, so I never watched.
Have you ever watched Game of Thrones? Because I get all the time. People are like, "Oh, have you seen Game of Thrones?" And then now I'm always like hesitant, like. No, and then I get nervous because whenever I tell people no, they're like, like as if I literally just killed someone, like point blank, shot them in front of them. Like,
yeah, I have no interest in Game of Thrones. I can't. Like, I've heard about it, I've read about it, and I mean, forget from a religious perspective. I just feel like it's a little bit just based on what people have told me and what I've read about, like how graphic it is. It's not for me.
Wait, religious? Why? It has a religious aspect to it, the show?
No, I'm saying from a religious perspective, I'm not going to watch it just because it's, there's probably...
Right. I heard it's like
from what I hear, there's pretty explicit and graphic things, so I'm not going to...
That's like HBO.
But even
I feel like everything HBO...
I feel like it's too much. I feel like it's a good reflection of where our society is when one of the most popular shows is Game of Thrones, when the number 1 song on the charts right now is a song called Unholy. Like it's just
my God.
I feel like it all reflects
showed
kind
me
of where
that
we're going.
song, and she's like, "Oh my God, you have to hear the song." And she showed me the song, and I'm like, "Oh my God!" She's like, "I know, it's a really scandalous song."
It's a little bit scary. It's like, whoa, and like that's the number 1 song.
No, it's funny because I feel like a lot of people always say how nowadays, like the music, personally, I don't like most music that comes out nowadays. It's just over processed, over manufactured, digital, like electronica, like whatever. Like everyone who sings, like all the female voices, it's hard to even dissect who is who unless you're like shown who's singing the song, because they're also edited their vocals and they're so one dimensional. They all sound the same. Like they all sound the same, and like barely anything has a chorus anymore. It's just music playing. But I feel like music nowadays, people always say, "Oh, it's so much more inappropriate," or "it was better in my days." Then I remember I was with Mom, and like we were listening to like a bunch of oldies, and I was like, these songs are really no better than we have nowadays. Like, I don't know why you thought these were cleaner, but like, there's a lot of songs also back then.
Well, it's like also like the hip hop and rap genre is way more mainstream than it was back then, and mainstream rap is a lot about violence and drugs and guns and all that kind of stuff, which is interesting and ironic. Because at the same time, you want to talk about wanting to help your community, and then at the same time you're rapping about drugs and violence and guns. And
there's a lot of that. Kind of stuff. But I feel like there's a little bit more diversity with that kind of stuff. Like Nicki Minaj, I know a lot of people like now are not so into her, but like a lot of her songs like aren't necessarily about violence or drugs. Like she has some great songs like Ganja Burn. I love that song off her last album. Right. Like
I think thank God we're just getting out of what they called the mumble rap era, with all these people like Lil Pump and these guys who are just terrible.
Everyone, by the way. Everyone has got to go. Lil Baby, Lil this,
the Island Boys.
Go.
Remember the Island Boys? The guys with the hair.
Oh my God, the Island Boys. Did you see Snoop Dogg and oh my God, I was dying.
Unreal.
They were reacting to the video. I don't know how people like. I mean, clearly, once they kind of took off, then they like really harvested on it. But like, they had all those tattoos and those hairstyles before it happened, so it's not like they just did that overnight. TikTok views or whatever. Like,
fake it till you make it.
I understand.
You want to put on a certain persona.
Like, what you don't want to fake it like that. I mean,
well,
what happens?
I mean, listen, it worked out for them. There, it worked out. It was good from a marketing perspective, but obviously,
for 15 minutes of fame,
right. And they're still trying to make music, but who's listening to that music? Once you become labeled as the Island Boys, you're gonna forever be the Island.
Anyone who listened to it wasn't listening to it because their music was good. They were listening to it to mock them.
It was like a troll. 100%.
Exactly.
It's funny because I always say, like, with Dennis Rodman, one of the greatest defenders of all time, no one really remembers him. No one really remembers him, unfortunately, for his gameplay. People who aren't necessarily big basketball fans won't remember him for his gameplay as much as his outlandishness, his craziness, his hairstyle, 100%. His relationships. So, like, once you kind of get labeled as that, as the weird or interesting guy, it's hard to get out of that.
So, speaking of Dennis Rodman, I think you know this story.
Yeah, this is a good story.
This is crazy. Probably like 8 years ago, me and my sister flew to Miami for what was supposed to be our friend's wedding, but she ended up canceling the wedding like 9 days beforehand, whatever. She ends up marrying him later on, but regardless. So we flew down there and we were staying at the Fontainebleau, and I was sitting by the pool, and it was like on Shabbat. So I was wearing like my little kippah, like my head covering, and I have like a rainbow one, like with the gay rainbow that I got in 2011.
The gay rainbow.
Yeah, I mean, the rainbow, gay rainbow, it's all the same.
It's ours. There's the rainbow.
Taste the rainbow Skittles.
Right.
So I got this kippah in like 2011 when I was in Israel for the year at like the Pride Parade. And so I'm sitting by the pool with everyone, and Dennis Rodman's there. And our sister is like freaking out because like we grew up, as kids in Chicago. She loved the Bulls. Like my father used to get tickets to the games all the time. Like, back in the days, like Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, like it was like really, like they were like, on fire. And so she runs over to him. She's like, "Oh my God, I'm such a fan of you." And he's like, "That's great. Step aside." And then he continues walking. She's like clearly devastated. And then I'm talking to our friend, and then he looks at me, and then he like stops. He's like, "Wait, are you Jewish?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, and you're gay?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "You're openly gay and you're like Jewish?" I was like, "Yeah." And he literally gets down on his knee and kisses my hand and tells me he has so much respect for me. And I was like I was just caught off guard, and I wasn't like the biggest like sports like so I was like, "Oh, thanks." And like then he like walked away, and I was like, "Okay, that was weird." And everyone was freaking out around me, like freaking out, like, right. "Oh my God." And I was like, I mean, okay. Like, I mean, I guess it was.
I remember that happening. That's crazy.
If it was Britney Spears, I would have dropped dead, or Lady Gaga died. But like Dennis Rodman was like, I mean, he was really nice, and it was nice of him. And I'm glad that like, he was able to respect me for being Jewish and gay. But yeah, it was pretty funny. Good times.
That's so interesting.
Times. Yeah.
I mean, he's obviously someone. He's someone who's always probably felt like an outsider, so he probably respects the fact that you can maintain a part in 100% a very community-based religion, and at the same time, maintain your own individual identity.
Yeah, he was always criticized for his crazy hair colors and like for wearing makeup and like all the different.
There's great stories about him in the Netflix. And the Netflix has had that documentary, The Last Dance, which was phenomenal about the Bulls, and it was really kind of about Michael Jordan, everyone said, where it was like his show, but it was very interesting to hear some of the behind-the-scenes stories about Dennis Rodman and how he would need to go on a break for like a few days, go to Vegas, get it out of the system, come back, and but he was extremely talented. He was crazy, he was a crazy basketball player. He was extremely talented, one of the best defenders of all time.
They were like, and at the same time, they were like at the peak of their game. So like they were everywhere. Everyone loved the Bulls. Across the world. It wasn't even just Chicago or in America, like literally across the world. They were so beloved. So it's like, and everything was so maximized back then, and everything like there was such a wall between celebrities and sports stars and us. Like now we have social media and we see much more of them. Like the only times you really got to see celebrities were like from magazines or whenever they went to award shows or something. From whatever we saw in that, we didn't get like there was always like a barrier. So now we see much more of them. So I feel like it was like such a different time also. And, his difference, like, being different was so harped on by like the media, and like they would make it like such a thing. And like, that's all he was known for. Like you said, like it kind of overshadowed everything else.
Right. It's the same idea as the radical, minority always being the loudest. It's on a communal level. It's on an individual level. Yeah. What were you saying?
Totally. Have you been following this whole Idaho college murders that happened.
You mentioned it. We spoke about it briefly, I think about a month or so ago, and then I saw obviously on the news a few days ago that they had got a guy, they got a suspect, they got him, and then I was doing a little bit of research on him.
I know
that you've been following it closely, so.
Literally, on the day of New Year's Eve, I literally was sitting in my apartment, thinking oh my God, I feel so bad for these poor families. It's about to be a new year. They have no answers of any kind. Their children were brutally murdered. What's become of it? It's been almost 2 months. It was almost 7 weeks at this point. It was I was just thinking I feel so horrible for them. And then in the middle of the night here in Israel, it happens, I think the night or maybe mid-afternoon in America, by you, they caught him. And I was freaking out. What? At first it was just a suspect arrested, which I was oh my God. But it's also just a suspect. So how much do they know? Or I didn't see any details yet, but they caught the guy, Brian Kohlberger. He was in school in Washington State. He for criminology.
Yeah, I saw that.
He's a 15-minute drive from where they were. And then he ended up driving with his father to Pennsylvania right after it all happened. But they found his DNA at the scene. When all the blood was mixed, they have to separate it and then, go through all the processing of it or whatever. And he also had a 2013 Hyundai Elantra, which they saw on camera. And they were able to pin it all on him through genealogy, like they did with the Golden State Killer, which our father thinks that 23andMe and all that stuff is just a scam and they just make this stuff up, of course. But that's how they called it the Golden State Killer. And that's how now they caught this guy who cannot wait to be sent to, because he's in Pennsylvania now, he can't wait to be sent to Idaho, be extradited there so he could prove his innocence and be exonerated. That's not going to happen. The police, they were no, we're very confident. We don't really have a doubt. There's no other suspect. But what's interesting is when he was arrested, the first question he asked was, am I the only one that's been arrested? Which is a really interesting thing. So, was there another person involved? Did he have an accomplice?
Or maybe he just wanted he was hoping he'd get put on someone else.
It's
so
a weird
he wanted to see what his chances were
of
getting out of it.
It's so frightening. And there's a lot of things that aren't going to be able to come out until he's extradited. I think it happened today, actually, or it's happening today. He's being sent to Idaho, and they're not allowed to really speak about anything until he appears in court in Idaho. He was already charged in Pennsylvania, but until he speaks in court, they can't release much detail. So we're really going to have to wait for the whole trial and everything to play out to hear exactly what happened. But was he watching these people beforehand? Did he have any connection to them whatsoever? The parents don't know who this guy is. He wasn't in
and we don't know. They don't know if there's a motive. They have zero idea what a motive could be. Was he affiliated with any of those students?
So that's the thing. He didn't go to that school or anything, but they just released, I think it was today or yesterday, that he recently drove to the University of Idaho and was there for a little bit. And he had no reason to be. He wasn't in that school or anything. But he made a Reddit post. It was hi, my name is Brian, and I'm inviting you to participate in a research project that seeks to understand how emotions and psychological traits influence decision-making when committing a crime. In particular, the study seeks to understand the story behind your most recent criminal offense with an emphasis on your thoughts and feelings throughout your experience. In the event that your most recent offense was not one that led to a conviction, you may still participate. Additional surveys are included after the open-ended section as to best understand your unique traits. This study should only take about 15-20 minutes to fully complete. Then he talks about how it's going to be, anonymous and everything. Was he testing himself on this? Was it something that he was interested in? So he wanted to see how other people feel when they're committing crimes and stuff. What is it? He was literally studying to become a criminologist. He got his master's at Washington State in
he was looking
bizarre.
For people to take part in the survey and to describe what was going through their mind emotionally, mentally when they were.
He wanted to understand the attribution between
I wonder if emotional. Do any of this. So I wonder if it was just scouting people out for his weird, psychopathic.
So this was a couple of years ago,
or if
so
it
wasn't
I wonder if they
before.
have any political affiliation or something that would have triggered him to target them specifically. Because they all knew they were all roommates, all the students.
So but what's interesting is there were two roommates on the first floor, and they they weren't attacked. Apparently, the story is that he came in through the sliding glass door in the back that was unlocked. So he went up to the second floor, killed 2 of them, and went up to the third floor and killed 2 of them. So there were 4 people that were killed. And why he didn't kill the people on the first floor, maybe he didn't know they were there. It's just really, the whole thing is just so frightening and just like, just horrendous on like every single level imaginable. Horrible. I can't imagine what these families are going through. And, you know, even now that they could get some sort of justice, now that they did get somebody, so at least they can start to begin the healing process. It's like nothing will ever make their lives normal again. Or like, I don't know how people who lose a child, especially in such a horrendous way, how they can move forward with that. But the craziest thing with this guy also is that he was a hardcore vegan. So crazy that he literally made his parents get rid of their dishes that have cooked cooked meat or milk or anything beforehand. Like as if it was like a strictly kosher thing. Like they had to be thrown out. Like so someone he's a hardcore vegan, yet he could literally brutally murder 4 people with a knife, one after the next. Like And
I mean, he's obviously not well.
Looks dead in the eyes. Yeah, he's not well, but like it's just like it's concerning. It's frightening on like every level imaginable.
Right. This is really it's pretty terrifying. It's interesting because I was just listening to something the other day about how, although obviously there's a lot more people nowadays than there was a few hundred years ago, there are less deaths taking place on a daily basis now than there's ever been.
In terms of like relative, death, in terms of related disease,
or just anything, how many people, or just in general, how many people die per hour, per minute, or whatever it is, used to be a lot higher relative to the size of Earth's population versus what it is now.
Really?
I don't know how accurate that is, but I heard it. I think I might have heard it from Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he's always right. So
always right. Yeah, I mean, if you were gonna say like Alex Jones or something, I would have been like, yeah, don't even take a grain of salt with that one.
He was just on Joe Rogan again, and I was watching one of the clips, and the top comment, because everyone's always making jokes about Neil deGrasse Tyson, and the top comment had like 20,000 likes. Was Neil is the type of guy to wake his entire family up to tell them that he's going to sleep. Which I thought was so great. But yeah, it's very interesting. It's scary. We live in scary times, but there's also a lot of good. Listen, people always say like things used to be a lot simpler or a lot easier, but there was always crazy things going on. You know, I was just listening to another podcast. I think it was John Bernthal, and he was talking about how, you know, back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, there's always political things going on. There was Vietnam. Everyone hated the soldiers when they came back. They weren't shown any respect. You had Nixon and that whole situation in the 60s. There was always something going on that was stirring the pot. So it wasn't like everyone had it easier. And there's also less people living in poverty now, relative to our population than there's been in a long time. And the poor people that are poor now, at least in certain countries, obviously not all countries, but in more Western countries in Europe, poor people don't suffer the same way that poor people were poor or suffered 100, 200 years ago. You know, the conditions were were much worse because at least we have more resources now. We have the ability to at least help in some way, even though obviously it's not enough because there's still.
So where'd you get these statistics?
Which statistics?
I'm trying to figure it out. I'm saying like these, like I'm saying, is that really true?
Yeah,
for real?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I never knew that.
Yeah,
it's
sure.
Very interesting. I don't know. I feel like just school shootings alone in America, I feel like it's like that in itself. It's crazy. I feel like
over the past generation, extreme poverty declined hugely. This is one of the most important ways our world has changed over this time.
By Trump?
There are more than 1 billion fewer people living below the international poverty line of $2.15 per day than in 1990.
Than in 1990, really?
Yeah, it's declining right now at about 2% a year, but it is declining, the poverty rate. I mean, I think as we achieve more resources, and interesting because last night I shared. With my wife, this video that I watched when a few weeks ago, or maybe a month ago. I don't know if you heard they achieved nuclear fusion for the first time, which is crazy. Which I feel like a lot of these things we don't pay any attention to.
Oh, I do. I'm such an undercover nerd.
We can't really appreciate how crazy it is because we're not necessarily as well versed in these subjects as other people. But it's wild. We literally create more energy than we input, and that can completely change the future for us.
But it's just a matter of like, we really have to make sure this kind of stuff is safe and everything.
Right.
It's all so new. We don't know, the consequences or anything like that. If there are every cause is an effect. Like there's always something. So, and
you
if people are scared of getting a COVID
announcing.
shot, like they're going to be like wary of this because everything's a conspiracy. This is going to be another conspiracy. Everything has to be something.
What that is. I wonder what it is, because I feel like some people have a natural instinct to kind of just go against the grain or against the current, so to speak, when it comes to
go against the rules. It's always like there's always like that rebel and stuff. It's you don't want to be told what to do, how to do it, what it's like. Does the government?
Right, but I think there always is
absolutely
there's
things that have to be kept from us as well.
Right. So I think there is some truth to some things that they say. And that,
100%.
The conspiracy theorists. What is interesting is that a lot of conspiracy theorists, a lot of conspiracy theorists don't believe in flat Earth theory, and they separate flat Earthers to like a different, or like in their own.
That's like another, like that's like it doesn't make any sense. Like, have you ever been on an airplane? Do you not see the curvature?
A buddy of mine who has a podcast had someone on who Flat Earth Dave. Shout out to Two Idiots and an Expert podcast, but they had on this guy Flat Earth Dave. And he was just going on about, all his evidence, now he believes. But at the end of the day, I was watching an interview with someone else who's a flat earther. And he was asked, I think he read off a Reddit comment, but it was like to suggest that the earth is flat would be to suggest that all the 90 or so space agencies and their thousands of employees all around the world in different countries that are competing.
And now one of them ever cracked. Never.
Right. But they're all in cahoots.
Why would the government lie about the earth being flat? Like the easiest question is, what do they have to gain?
Right.
Why does that matter? Like literally, why does it matter?
About
everyone going to space is a liar.
Well, in their minds, it's probably about keeping the elite at the top and the rest of us plebeians at the bottom, or whatever it is, keeping the 1%ers in the 1%.
And if their way of doing that is by convincing us that the earth is round when it's really flat, then they really need to work on a new MO, because that's like a really, really crappy way of obtaining that goal.
Yeah, Vsauce has a great video. What if the earth was actually flat? How would gravity affect us? And it's ridiculous. The more you walked towards the edge, it would be at like more and more of an incline until it was like nearly impossible. At the end, it'd be almost walking straight up.
Like it doesn't even it literally makes no sense in any way. Like if you think about it, like realistically, even for like 5 minutes, I don't know how people could really truly believe that.
I wonder. I feel like there's so much we don't know. There's so much we don't know about the universe. There's so much we know, but there's also so much that we don't know.
There's so much we don't know.
Right.
But this is something we know. Like
there's probably more we don't know. Like it's interesting because the multiverse theory used to be, I feel like, looked at by the common person as something a little bit silly or more like a long shot. But it seems to make a lot more sense now, and I hear a lot more people discussing the possibility. Because if you believe that that outside of our universe exists an infinite amount of parallel universes. In which there's an infinite number of ourselves doing an infinite amount of different things at this exact moment. Because
if number of ourselves, like there's other me's,
there's other universes.
The world cannot handle that shit. I could really handle that
multiverse, the multiverse theory, which is interesting because in Judaism, I know in Kabbalah,
like the Spider-Verse,
there's concepts spoken about. I remember I read a book probably 10 years ago called The Light Beyond.
I was like, when did you read a book recently?
I read books, thank you. I actually read more now than I ever did. More than I ever did. I only read. I can't listen.
500. I'm just kidding.
The only time I can listen to books is when I'm driving and like the kids are passed out or something. I'll put on I'll have like an AirPod in and I'll listen to a book. But I read a lot. I read a lot now.
Really?
Which is funny because I literally never read a book. I didn't read a single book throughout all of school until 10th grade. I read The Crucible, which was, I think, 95 pages.
I was in a play for The Crucible, thank you very much. When I was in Bar Ilan, I played Thomas Putnam, and I had a wife and everything, so...
that's the only book I ever read, and then I, over COVID, I think, when we were kind of locked down, everyone, my wife and her whole family, they all are very into reading, so I just started reading.
What are you going to do? I like sit there as like everyone else to bring a book, and you're just like...
Right. So I like fiction and nonfiction, and I self-help books depends, like very specific.
I can't get into them. Like I just feel like everything is all the same. Like they're just extended Hallmark cards. Like be your true self. Don't let negative energy around you. It's all like the same. Like I mean, I'm in therapy, like, and I like therapy, but like I feel like the self-help books, it's like.
Sometimes I think it gives you a little boost of motivation. You know, I just bought a book that Shiragi's, a friend of mine, suggested I get a couple months ago called Atomic. I have it right there, called Atomic Habits by James Clear. Phenomenal book. So like things like that I'll read, but yeah, I didn't really read any books throughout school until later on. But now, yeah, I think I'm much more into reading. But anyways, what I was saying before is that so I read this book from R.E. Kaplan, The Light Beyond, probably about 10 years ago. One of the first books I read of his. I'm a big fan of R.E. Kaplan, Rabbi R.E. Kaplan, of blessed memory. And
he died.
He was a genius. He was like the who's who of physics when he was like 21. I don't think he became religious till he was in his late 20s. He died when he was 48. And in the short time that he
48,
that he dedicated his life to Judaism, he wrote like 50 books. You don't understand, when he would translate, he wrote his own translation of the Torah, and he would type it all out in English. And Rabbi Chaim Kramer, who runs the Breslov Research Institute, who hired him to work with them, he told me that he would see him just type the translation, and then afterwards he would go through all the footnotes. He had no books with him, and he would just type all the footnotes and sources off his head. So he was an incredible genius. But he mentioned something from a few different sources in Judaism. There's a similar concept, not in the same way that the multiverse is described, but where there exists in some place this realm of infinite potential, that anything that could happen. And I think they use that to sort of explain how the paradox of free will. How does free will exist if God is omniscient, omnipotent, if he's all knowing? How could we really have free will? So they use that to sort of explain it. That, God knows the potential of everything and knows what you'll choose, but you have the ability to manifest any of these potentials by acting on it, by your own free will. I don't know if that makes sense. It's been a long time since I read it, but.
No, I think that makes sense. I think I'm just like, it was just a lot of like things for me to keep up. So I'm like,
right. Cause we don't know anything, we're getting pictures now from the James Webb Telescope, which is incredible.
Beyond. It's incredible. So crazy. It looks like one of those like AI art things.
Looks fake. It looks like someone made it on a computer, and it's the most
literally crazy
ending thing ever.
On a new computer, like your new one.
Right. That's this little. It's crazy. It's so magnificent. You look at these pictures, and they literally, you can't even believe they're real. Like these space.
Like that's like I feel like that kind of thing. It's like it's hard not to believe in God when you see stuff like that. Like, it was just like stars colliding and shit.
Well, the atheist argument is why is the first thing you jump to this being that had to create everything? Why is that more probable than us coming into existence naturally? But obviously, there's still no answer to the question of what.
Right, that's the thing.
What started
it's not like you have definitive proof about religion, but you don't have definitive proof that it's not real. So that's the thing. Is that
now a few scientists are suggesting, at least from what I've heard, that are suggesting the idea that the Big Bang was not the first of its kind, but another Big Bang in a cycle of Big Bangs that just constantly sort of happens in the universe cycle.
Maybe it was like God's like furnace was like acting up, so we had to like hit it a couple times,
Right, or just that we weren't the first. And there's similar things like that. Again, I always find parallels in Judaism, but like there's references in Judaism and in the Talmud and the Midrash about God having created and destroyed other worlds before he created this one. Again, what that means.
Right, but it's interesting also because you think of like the other planets in the world, like maybe one of those were habitable at one point,
right?
And it changed. Yeah, no, I think that kind of stuff is very interesting. It's very cool, and honestly, it kind of makes sense. And like that's why, like even when Elon Musk talks about how like Earth eventually is not going to be habitable and everything like that. Well, maybe it's something that like that that's when this world is like at its time and stuff.
So it's interesting because the last few months I've been super into this because. I don't know if you've ever heard of Graham Hancock. I'm a huge Graham Hancock fan.
Is he related to like John Hancock?
John Hancock? I don't think so. That's just they share a similar last name. He was on Joe Rogan. I'm not even sure what you would call him. They refer to him in the mainstream, archaeological community as like a pseudoscientist, but he's a citizen scientist who's dedicated his life to researching ancient history, and more specifically, he puts forward this theory that most of science agrees, I believe, that about 12,800 years ago there was a cataclysm that reshaped the entire world.
Right.
So some people attribute it to the Younger Dryas theory of these meteors and this ice age and everything reshaping it, but that's what's agreed upon. His theory, Graham's theory, is that there wasn't a super advanced ancient civilization that existed around the time of the ice age that was going around educating other societies and civilizations around the world, how to, teaching them agriculture and how to build, how to farm. And his evidence for this are the amount of megalithic structures that we have no idea how they were built all around the world, mind you, all in countries that seemingly have nothing to do with each other, that wouldn't have any contact. No one was circumnavigating the globe way back then. And what's interesting also is that, and with Judaism as well, all these different civilizations have their own story. Many of them have their own story of a great flood, which took place a long time ago. And then these people, or a person or a creature that came after and taught them how to rebuild, how to do agriculture, who taught them astronomy, because a lot of these structures are also, he points out, a lot of them are aligned astronomically. For example, where the front of like a temple or a building will be built facing perfect geographical north, which doesn't change, which they should not have known how to do that, because according to most scientists,
I feel like in terms of like north and all that kind of stuff, I feel like they still have compasses because there is a magnetic field around the Earth. Right,
but according to most scientists, according to pretty much everyone, the consensus is we were hunter-gatherers until like 5,000-6,000 years ago. And hunter-gatherers should have no knowledge of astronomy. They should have, we weren't civilized. So that's his theory. I'm actually reading a book of his now called The Fingerprints of the Gods, where he goes through his evidence, and that's like one of his main books. But I've been thinking about all this stuff. It's been on my mind because I was watching him and Randall Carlson, and I watched he has a new Netflix series, Graham Hancock, called Ancient Apocalypse, where he tries to go through some of these. And some of these places, there's one in America called Serpent Mound. I forgot which state it's in, which is another megalithic structure, which is a massive, huge serpent built facing directly north, with its head directly north. And they wouldn't even let him onto the site to film. He actually read out the email in the Netflix show in front of like the gate. They wouldn't let him in because they think his theories or his views threaten the integrity of this historical site and all this stuff. And he just feels like they don't want to answer questions that, like Egypt, you were there, right? You were at the pyramids. So that's got to be
it's beyond. Insane. It's like, it's not even normal. Like I always wanted to go because I always wanted to see the pyramids. And like, I've always loved Egypt. I've always loved seeing the pictures.
I've always loved
Egypt. Until you see, always. I always say, I mean, it's horrible, but like kind of, but like if I was living in those days where like all the Jews, we were like enslaved in like Egypt and all that stuff, like either... Like, I feel like I totally would have had an affair with Pharaoh, and, like, we would have been fine. Like, I would have been cool. I would have been like, yeah, bye, guys. Like, you do your thing. I'm cool. But I also probably would have went through all those plagues they went through. But seeing the pyramids in person, it's not even normal. Looking at the Great Pyramid, it's not even normal. The fact that they were able to build that, and it's kind of interesting because this is one thing. Like, that is amazing to me, but like when you circling back a little bit, oh my gosh, I sound like I'm in a business meeting. Let's circle back to that. When you were talking about like the Great Flood, like I feel like, we have like Hurricane Katrina, and we have had things where there have been like crazy tsunamis or stuff like that, where something like that's possible. The one thing though that I always am like, I mean, I never really like thought about it much until I was like as like an older teenager. Like with Noah and the Ark, and how like supposedly he built it by himself in just the span of a very short time, and then 2 of every single animal were brought onto this boat that he himself and only himself built with no construction equipment of any kind. Like, and it was made out of wood, and that's the only thing that survived with all those different animals that were inside. Like, it's like I always wonder if was it something that happened exactly like that, or was it something that like there's kind of like a lesson to be learned from the story in itself, and the story might have some sort
of... even according to Jewish literature, there were people and animals who survived the flood. Fish, I believe, survived the flood. Og, for example, who was a giant. Yeah, who was a giant. He survived the flood. So there were people within the Jewish.
Oh, I thought everything was wiped out. And that's it. No. And like I imagine like the boat floating like close to the sun because the water's so freaking high.
Close to the sun in space, millions of miles out.
It was just such a great flood. The whole world was like destroyed. So that's what I imagine. I'm like, these people on this small little wooden boat that's carrying like 2 of every single animal imaginable. Right. And mind you, how long were they on that boat for? Because like, what if one animal out of the 2 died? Did it have backups? Like there was no backups?
There was a documentary I found years ago. You should take a look at this. I'm curious what your thoughts would be, but they have a few videos on YouTube also where they discovered a massive, what seems to be a wooden boat.
I know.
Mountains in Turkey, which is where the Torah says it stopped. So I'm just saying.
It's interesting. No, it's interesting. But like, I just feel like it's 2 of every single animal and like, they all managed to be fine, and like who was feeding all of them? Who was cleaning up after all of them? So how massive was this boat? Like the Titanic was massive for its time. This was so much earlier, and he was one person that built himself.
Like so, my general opinion on these things is, once you believe in God and a God who created the world, even if he created a world which generally exists through the cycle of cause and effect, let's say. Where do you draw the line with what's possible? Meaning, if you believe in a God, why does everything have to be contained within the laws of nature or rationality? If you already believe in an infinite being who controls everything or who created everything,
so that's the thing is because it's the fact that he himself, Noah, is the one who built it. So like if it was something where like God created this miracle thing and gave him a boat. Even though that sounds also very like, ooh, if you're someone who doesn't believe in religion. But to me, compared to this one guy who built a huge ass boat that could carry 2 of every single animal on earth, like to me, the God presenting a boat magically sounds more believable in my mind because it's one guy who they didn't have any equipment. Like
well, what about his family? I mean, if you just get a basic reading of the Torah, it doesn't necessarily imply that he was completely alone by himself. His family or his kids, I'm sure his sons helped him out. He has.
Could you imagine if Dad was like, "Hey guys, so I need your help, like building this huge ass boat that we're gonna put 2 of every animals in it because the world's coming to an end." I would like stare at him and be like, "Yeah, okay." And then I look at you and be like, "Yeah, we should probably check him in somewhere because like."
And it's interesting because in Jewish faith as well, in our literature, there's a discussion as to whether or not he was even considered a holy person or whether or not he was just considered righteous relative to his generation, but really he wasn't.
What do you mean a holy person?
Meaning, there's the Torah, the Bible refers to him as a righteous man. But there's a discussion was he called righteous only because he lived in a generation with people who were the exact opposite, so he was considered righteous relative to their badness, or was he righteous and no matter what time he lived in, he would have been considered righteous? That's the question.
Well, if it calls him righteous, why do we have to question that? Like, well, how do we know he was actually good? Maybe he wasn't that good. Like, why do we have to do that? Maybe we could just take the word of God. Like, okay, he was a righteous man. Not like, but how righteous?
I think it's because the way that the verse is written, it says Noah was a righteous man. He was complete or wholesome in his generation. So what does that mean in his generation? Does that mean that he was righteous and wholesome only in his generation relative to his generation, or was he righteous in general? I think that's
maybe they were really bad then. I mean, well, if the whole purpose was to destroy the world because it was so bad, then I guess it kind of makes sense then. Because I mean, if it was like that bad.
Yeah, but I've been so the last.
You think they had that song WAP come out in those days, and now we're just getting a I
don't even know what that is. I don't even want to know what that is. But I'll tell you.
Oh my god! Don't even.
The last few months, I've just been fascinated and enthralled in just reading all these things about the ancientness of the world. Because even in Judaism, there's a tradition that the world was created already in motion, already a mature earth, so to speak. It wasn't created as like a baby earth that then grew. Meaning the way that we could tell how old a tree is, you cut the trunk and you could look at the rings, the number of rings, I think will tell you the age. So what that means is when the world was created, had you cut open a tree, it would have rings in there, meaning it wasn't created as everything was brand new and growing.
Right. That's the thing also is when it talks about God created the world in 7 days, but time necessarily doesn't work like it does now. So it's possible it was like if we compared it to our time now, maybe it was longer.
Also, I believe R.A. Kaplan was of the opinion that, and again, this is not my opinion, I'm just stating R.A. Kaplan's opinion. He was of the opinion, I believe, that we count the 5,783 years that we're up to now, not from the creation of the world, but from the first person to develop a conscious recognition of the singular God, of our God, which was Adam. But that doesn't mean that he was the first person. It just means that he was the first one to become a monotheist and recognize God. But which that theory would help, I guess, explain other seeming contradictions with Judaism, for example, evolution or Neanderthals. They could have all existed under that perspective. Totally. Everything like that it's all possible. Evolution. So even if we came from monkeys, according to that theory, there wouldn't be anything wrong with that. It's just a matter of how you interpret the Torah itself. Obviously, there's various ways to do that.
Totally.
But yeah, it's very interesting. There's so much we don't know. There's so much yet to be discovered. I was just,
even just on Earth with the ocean. I have a very weird relationship when it comes. I live right by the beach in Tel Aviv in the Mediterranean Sea, and I used to never like going to the beach because I couldn't stand the sand gets here, there, and everywhere. I always loved the beach from a view in a penthouse or something. But, going to it, there's sand in your eyes, it's in your bag, the water gets in your eyes. It's just it ends up being a mess. But since I moved here, I do like going to the beach now. But with water and everything, I like water and I like swimming. But when it comes to the ocean, it's just the water could be even with the whole flood thing. Water could be it's earth, fire, wind, water. It could be the lightest thing, just a couple of drops of water, or a light mist, and it could also be a deadly force to reckon with that could wipe out people like that. So it's it's such a crazy thing, and to think that 95% of Earth is water, and there's so much that even nowadays we haven't explored, or just the Mariana Trench in itself,
right.
It's just crazy. It's most of the Earth. There's so many species of fish we haven't even seen. I think I've read something we only know 7% of fish.
I think we've discovered 3% of. I remember watching a TED talk 10, 15 years ago that had images of this octopus that could change its texture, not only its color, which was wild. But he said we've only discovered 3% of the ocean. I mean, some of the tallest mountains in the world are underwater.
The fact that we have equipment that can't reach some depths, yet there's living creatures that are at those depths is mind-boggling.
It's crazy. The pressure is insane. It's literally.
And we're always talking about aliens. It's people. Hello, we literally have aliens on this Earth.
I remember I went scuba diving in Israel in a lot on a summer program 10 years ago, and I remember the guy telling me there's 27 species of fish there that you won't find anywhere else in the world. First of all, I was 10 feet down, and the pressure, I thought my right eye was going to pop. And they kept telling me
a few minutes till I was able to allow myself to go under, because getting myself to breathe being underwater, it's
so weird.
It's so right. It's so ingrained in you. You don't do that. So it was hard for me to get. Yeah.
I just felt it felt like someone was slowly inserting a needle into my eye, and I can't turn and tell my guy that because I have a massive thing in my mouth and goggles on.
Right,
so
you
I'm
have to do a sign.
And he's trying to tell me to blow out with my nose, and I'm holding my nose and squeezing and blowing.
Right,
as
and then once you start freaking out, then it's not good, and then it's just it's too much. Yeah,
because you go into panic mode.
That's the thing is I love water, but it also freaks the heck out of me.
It's also I think the vastness of the ocean is what scares me. When
I remember
I'm
being
in the
on a
ocean,
cruise,
that's what I think about.
I
think they call it agoraphobia.
Agoraphobia is when you don't want to leave your house because you don't like people or anything.
No, I think agoraphobia is a fear in general of open spaces, if I'm not mistaken.
Really? Maybe. I remember being on a cruise and at night and then looking on the ocean. You don't see any land, no lighthouses, no anything. It's just dark.
Right.
And it's just so scary. The Titanic, when I went down and there's no lights, the electricity was off, and they're going around the freezing sea.
Pitch black. So here, agoraphobia is a fear of being in situations where escape might be difficult or that help wouldn't be available if things go wrong. Right. So
that doesn't sound so crazy. I feel like a lot of people.
If you're cast out in the middle of the ocean and it's just, and what's also interesting.
Remember in Shameless when she had agoraphobia? Did you ever see that show?
No.
Oh, well, there's the character who had agoraphobia. She wouldn't leave her house. It's funny.
Yeah, it's scary. It's scary.
Yeah.
I still get that fear. I still get that. I don't like the beach. I never liked the beach just because of sand everywhere and in everything. I remember as a kid going to the beach, eating a bag of Chips Ahoy, and then the next thing you know, I'm chewing on sand. And you don't want to spit out that cookie.
And where are you washing your hands?
And you only got a few cookies with you, so you're going to eat the bag. You're going to eat the sand. You got to eat the sand.
And I live right near the beach, so I literally could walk home and immediately jump in the shower. But we were kids, and then we would get in the car, and there's stains in the car, and like it's like almost like glitter, where like no matter how much you clean it up, like you're always gonna find specks of it.
Yep.
It's like
you could power wash your shoes for 35 minutes, but there will be sand in there.
Right. Like when they have the things to rinse off your feet, except for then you're walking on the wet sand, which gets back into your shoes and on it. And then it's like, that like didn't even help.
I'm not a big beach guy. Never have been. Swimming in general. It's interesting you said before how water, obviously there's a lot of good and at the same time can just completely crush you, because that's the same idea with like the flood, at least with Noah or Noach in those times. If you read what was going on, there was adultery, there was people stealing, and all of those things, at least symbolically from Judaism's perspective, represent going out of your boundaries and wanting more than what is given to you, right?
Yeah.
Adultery, stealing, you're trying to take things beyond your boundaries. We're trying to deep level, at least in terms of Kabbalah, the way that they explain that is an inner desire to want to experience more, to want to experience more blessing. And the way that they were punished was an overflow of blessing, was an overflow of water, which is the very life source of everything. But like you said, at the same time, too much of it can kill you. And that's exactly what happened. It was as if God said, if you want more than you can handle, I'll give you more than you can handle. And that's sort of, at least that's one of the perspectives of, how it was.
So God kind of like a little bit pulled the Britney, where it's like, they want more, so I'll give them more.
Well, it was just more measure for measure, which I think predates Revitz and Spears, but
possibly,
and her contributions to society, but
just in my life.
But yeah, I think we're gonna call it there for today. My body is shutting down on me because I am under the weather.
No, so don't let it shut down, because I can't do this show alone. So guys,
exactly.
Make sure
hopefully not. We'll be back on. Hopefully we'll be back on, rain or shine. We try to get the episodes out. We try to get them out every Wednesday or Tuesday when we film, or Wednesday or Thursday. Try to do it Tuesday or Wednesday. Keep with consistency. Hopefully get our social medias off the ground.
Yeah, if there's any topics you guys want us to talk about or anything you think of.
Please, because there is a comment section on Spotify. I always see there's a comment section if you want. Oh. Yep, there is. You can reply and comment. I think there's a you could add. I could add a Q&A. There's also, I think it asks what you thought about the podcast. If you want to share any ideas or suggestions or criticisms or comments or insults, please feel free to send them our way.
We'd love to hear it all.
And wishing everyone a
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
2023.
Happy holidays. We just kind of left. Yeah, 2023. Hopefully, I want to wish everyone a good, strong, healthy, mentally, emotionally, physically. Yeah. 2023, good year. Everything gets better.
Hopefully people get jobs.
And hopefully we could start looking up. God willing.
Yes.
So, amen. Wishing everyone well. We'll catch you guys next week. And see you on the flip. Take care.
Thanks.